People thought this was just another rumor about a girl and her dangerous boyfriend. They didn't know she had invented him, or that the lie she told to feel safe would open a door to something far older and far more fragile than evil. It began on the coldest night of autumn, when Elena stood outside the golden lights of the Seraphine Hotel, shivering in her red dress and pretending she wasn't afraid. Music thumped behind the glass doors, her company's anniversary gala pulsing with laughter, champagne, and the man she had been trying to avoid for months, her boss, Victor Hale. Victor never touched her in ways that could be reported, never spoke words that would get him fired. But his eyes stayed too long, his compliments dragged too close to her skin, and lately he had started waiting for her in empty corridors with that smile that said he believed he owned her future. So she had done something desperate, something small and stupid that was supposed to protect her. She had invented a boyfriend, a serious one, dangerous, she had hinted, with a quiet, sharp laugh she didn't feel. "You wouldn't want to upset him, Mr. Hale," she had said, clutching her notebook too tight. "He's very protective." The lie had tasted like metal on her tongue, but Victor had actually stepped back. For the first time, he had looked uncertain. Tonight, that lie had to become real. Elena checked her phone again, staring at the last text she had sent to the universe, because no real person fit the role she needed. "Please, whoever is listening, I just need one night. One man who looks like danger so I can be safe." It wasn't a prayer, not exactly. It was the kind of whispered wish people make when their backs are against a wall, when they don't believe in magic but secretly hope the dark is listening. The wind shifted, the street lamps flickered, and the world around her seemed to inhale. She felt him before she saw him, like the air grew heavier and softer at the same time. The noise of the city faded into a low hum, as if someone had turned down the volume of reality. Elena's breath fogged in front of her, even though it wasn't that cold a night. A quiet voice inside her said, "Go back inside." But another voice, the tired one that had been surviving instead of living, whispered, "Just one night of not being afraid." Footsteps echoed on the cobblestones. He stepped out of the shadow between two parked cars, as if the darkness itself had decided to take shape. Tall, dressed in a long black coat that moved like a slow wave behind him. His hair fell over his forehead in wet, dark strands, and his face was too still, too composed, like a statue just starting to remember it had once been human. The streetlight brushed his skin and caught a faint, impossible glow in his eyes, burning red at the center, fading to a strange, deep gold at the edges. Elena's heart stumbled. Every instinct screamed danger. But there was something else beneath the fear, a strange calm, like standing on a cliff and realizing the drop is beautiful. He stopped a few steps away from her, hands at his sides, posture polite in a way that felt almost old-fashioned. "You should not be out here alone," he said softly, his accent wrapped in centuries she couldn't name. His voice was low, rough around the edges, but gentle, as if he was afraid of startling her. "I'm waiting for someone," Elena managed, lifting her chin. The lie she had been living hovered on her lips. "My boyfriend." She tried to sound confident, casual, like any normal woman whose life was not tangled in fear and office politics. The stranger's eyes studied her face with a focus that felt like a question. The red in them dimmed as if he was trying to hide it. "No," he murmured, almost to himself. "You are waiting for protection." Elena swallowed hard. "You don't know me." "I know fear," he said, "and I know the look of someone who has been cornered for too long." The hotel doors opened with a burst of music and laughter. Victor stepped outside, his expensive smile already in place, a glass of champagne in his hand. His gaze swept the sidewalk, landed on Elena, and flicked immediately to the man beside her. For a second, Victor's confident stride faltered. "Elena," Victor called, forcing warmth into his voice. "You disappeared. I was just coming to find you." His eyes slid up and down the stranger, measuring, testing. "And this must be the famous boyfriend you've been hiding from us." The word famous asterisk stuck in Elena's throat. She hadn't given this stranger a name, or a story, or permission to exist in it. She felt caught between two worlds, the bright, fake safety of the hotel and the heavy, honest darkness standing inches from her. She opened her mouth, but the stranger moved first. He stepped closer to her, not touching, but close enough that she could feel the cold coming off him. Her whole body tensed, yet under it was a strange sense of being, shielded. He didn't look at her, didn't even pretend affection. Instead, he faced Victor with a stillness that made the night hold its breath. "Yes," he said calmly, "I am the one she has been hiding." Something flickered in his eyes then, not heat, not pride, but regret. Elena saw it like a crack in stone. He was lying for her. This stranger, this dangerous apparition, was stepping into a story he did not know just because her fear was louder than her silence. Victor's smile tightened. "Well, I was starting to think you weren't real." He laughed a little too loudly and extended his hand. "Victor Hale, Elena's boss." The stranger looked at Victor's offered hand as if it were a fragile object that might break. Then he reached out slowly and took it. His fingers were long, pale, and elegant, adorned with a single dark ring that seemed to swallow the light. Victor tried to squeeze harder to prove something. His smile slipped almost immediately. The stranger's grip didn't change, but Victor's knuckles blanched, and a drop of sweat appeared at his temple. "Elena speaks highly of you," the man said softly. "She says you are ambitious." The way he said the word made it sound like a warning written in velvet. Victor pulled his hand back too fast. "Well," he said, clearing his throat, "we all just want what's best for her, career growth, opportunities." His eyes drifted back to Elena, lingering a moment too long on her bare shoulders. "She's very promising." The stranger's jaw tightened, almost invisible, but Elena saw it. The subtle flare of his nostrils. The way his gaze darkened, not brighter red, but deeper, like embers being smothered with ash. He finally turned to her, and for the first time their eyes locked fully. In that instant, she stopped hearing the music, the street, even Victor's nervous chatter. All she heard was the quiet roar of her own heart. His eyes were not just red. They were full of something she did not expect, sorrow. A loneliness so heavy it felt like standing in the ruins of a cathedral after the candles had burned out. He looked at her as if he recognized something, her fear, her exhaustion, her stubborn, fragile hope. "Elena," he said gently, her name settling on the air like a promise he had not meant to make. "Do you want to go back inside?" It was such a simple question, but nobody ever asked it like that. People asked what she could do for the company, what she could finish by Monday, how late she could stay, whether she might smile more. Nobody asked asterisk, "What do you want?" without already having the answer ready for her. Her throat tightened. "Not with him," she whispered, so softly she wasn't sure he would hear. But he did. The stranger's eyes closed for a heartbeat. When he opened them, they glowed just a fraction brighter, a quiet storm held tightly in place. He turned to Victor, his voice still polite, almost kind. "She is tired. She will not be returning to the party." Victor laughed, sharp and disbelieving. "I'm sorry, I don't think you understand our arrangement. Elena works for me. She doesn't just walk out in the middle of an important—" "She does now." This time there was no softness. The words carried a weight that made the small hairs on Elena's arms rise. It was not anger, not aggression. It was authority. Old, unquestionable, like a law carved into stone long before any of them were born. Victor opened his mouth to argue, but the streetlights suddenly dimmed. For a moment, the flame-shaped bulbs above the hotel doors flickered low, as if some unseen wind had passed through them. The shadows around the stranger thickened, his coat rippling without any breeze. Victor's voice died in his throat. Elena stared at the man beside her, fear and awe tangled together. Something inside her whispered the word she had only ever heard in stories, the one people used as a joke or a Halloween costume. "Vampire." Her mind tried to reject it. Monsters weren't real. Ancient kings of the night didn't walk in front of hotels and gently ask women what they wanted. And yet the air around him felt ancient. The temperature had dropped another degree. She could sense something in him held back with enormous effort, like the ocean pressed behind a glass wall. He took a slow breath and looked at Victor with a calm that was almost merciful. "You will not follow her tonight," he said quietly. "You will not wait for her in empty corridors. You will not speak to her in ways that make her shrink. If you care about your ambition, Mr. Hale, you will learn the difference between power and cruelty." Victor's face went pale. He forced a laugh that came out thin and shaky. "Who do you think you are?" The stranger hesitated. A flash of pain crossed his features, gone in an instant, but Elena caught it. the look of someone who was very tired of the answer to that question. He stepped closer to Victor, so close their faces were almost level. When he spoke, his voice was nearly a whisper, but it carried like thunder in a quiet valley. "I am the consequence you never expected." The wind rose suddenly, swirling fallen leaves in a tight circle around them. Elena's dress fluttered against her legs. Somewhere deep in the stranger's chest, something seemed to awaken like an old, reluctant heartbeat. He turned his head slightly, just enough for Elena to see the faint outline of sharp, hidden fangs behind his lips before he sealed them shut. Not a threat, a confession. Her stomach dropped. Her lie had called something real. He stepped back from Victor and offered his hand to her at last. Not in possession, not in command, but like a gentleman from another century asking for a dance he wasn't sure she would accept. His eyes softened as they met hers again. "Elena," he said quietly, and there was an almost human tremor in his voice, "if I walk with you tonight, your life will not be the same. Do you still want my help?" Her fingers hovered inches from his, shaking. Behind her, the golden hotel doors glowed with the promise of the same old fear. In front of her, the night waited, wrapped around a man who should have been a nightmare, yet somehow felt like the first person who had ever truly seen her. She looked at his outstretched hand, at the crimson stone resting against his chest, pulsing softly like a restrained heartbeat, and realized that he was not just dangerous to others. He was dangerous to himself. Every kindness he offered looked like it hurt. The world held its breath, balanced on her choice. And as her fingertips finally brushed his palm, a distant church bell began to ring, midnight rolling over the city like a silent warning. Just as the vampire king felt something in their joined hands he had not felt in hundreds of years. His own heart trying to remember how to beat. The first thing Elena noticed when her skin touched his was the temperature. His hand was cold, yes, but not like a corpse. It was the cold of river stones at night, of metal left out under the moon, solid, grounding, strangely clean. Her fingers trembled, but she did not pull back. For a heartbeat, nothing moved. The city, the hotel, even Victor seemed to blur at the edges. Inside his chest, something shifted. He had felt hands before. Centuries were full of touches, claws, blades, grips of fear and worship, but this was different. This was a soft, hesitant touch he had not demanded, not earned through fear, not bought with power. It was offered. It slipped into the cracks of his restraint like a sliver of light into an old, sealed tomb. He closed his fingers gently around hers. Behind them, Victor cleared his throat, trying to claw back control. "Elena," he said, forcing authority into his tone, "we should talk about this. You're overreacting. I've always." The stranger turned his head very slightly. He didn't glare, didn't bare fangs, didn't raise his voice. He simply looked at Victor. The air between them thickened, heavy as thunder before a storm. A car passed on the street, and its engine sputtered as if the night itself had decided to hold its breath. Victor stopped speaking. A small, almost invisible nod from the stranger, and then he led Elena away. Not dragging, not pulling, just walking, their hands still joined, giving her space to let go if she wanted. She didn't. They moved down the sidewalk, past the hotel's golden glow, and into the softer, quieter light of the street lamps. The music behind them faded to a dull throb. Each step felt like crossing a line she couldn't uncross. Elena glanced back once and saw Victor still standing on the hotel steps, pale and rigid, as if he couldn't decide whether to follow or pretend none of this had happened. "Did you do something to him?" Elena asked, voice low. "Like hypnotize him?" The stranger shook his head. "No, I only showed him himself for a moment. Most men do not like what they see when their reflection is honest." She tried to process that, but her mind kept circling back to the thing she was afraid to say out loud. "You're not normal," she whispered. A faint, wry smile touched his lips. "No, I have not been normal in a very long time." They crossed a narrow side street where the pavement was cracked and wet with an earlier rain. The air smelled faintly of damp stone and distant cigarettes. Her heels clicked on the ground, too loud in her own ears. She realized their hands were still linked and almost pulled away from sheer embarrassment, but his touch was strangely careful, as if he feared squeezing too hard might break her. You can let go, he said quietly, not looking at her. If you want. The kindness in that offer hit her harder than any threat could have. She tightened her grip instead. If I let go, I might turn around and pretend none of this is real, she said. And I'm tired of pretending. That made him glance at her. In the softer light of this quieter street, his eyes were less terrifying, more complicated. Up close, his features were oddly delicate, high cheekbones, a strong jaw softened by the faintest sadness at the corners of his mouth. He didn't look like a monster from a storybook. He looked like a man who had lost too much for too long. You are braver than you think, he said. She let out a shaky laugh. I just grabbed the hand of a stranger who might be a vampire. I'm not sure that counts as bravery. It might just be very creative stupidity. Sometimes, he replied, courage and desperation wear the same mask. They turned down a narrower lane lined with old buildings whose windows watched them like tired eyes. The city felt older here, the traffic noises far away, the sky wider and darker above the slim line of rooftops. Elena began to notice the quiet details, the soft scuff of his boots on the pavement, the way his coat whispered around his legs, the absence of visible breath in the cool air. You never told me your name, she said at last, needing something human to hold on to. For a moment he said nothing. His jaw flexed as if the answer cost him something. Names, he said slowly, are dangerous things, Elena. They bind, they summon, they remind. Mine is just a name, she replied, trying to sound lighter than she felt. It mostly reminds people to mispronounce my coffee order. He looked down at her and the corner of his mouth lifted again, a small, reluctant smile that made him look, for a heartbeat, almost young. It suits you, he murmured. Elena, a light in the dark. Her cheeks warmed. Nobody had ever said her name like that before, as if it mattered, as if it carried weight. Then what do I call you? She asked softly. If you won't give me your real name, at least give me something. They reached a small plaza where a dry fountain stood in the center, its stone figures worn smooth by time. Streetlights cast long shadows over the cobblestones. He released her hand only long enough to rest his fingers on the edge of the fountain, tracing the curve of the stone with a distant familiarity, as if greeting an old friend. Once, he said, they called me many things, monster, savior, curse, king. None of them felt like mine. Elena's heart skipped at the word *king, but she stayed quiet, letting him choose his pace. Now, he continued after a moment, the name I use is more humble. He turned toward her fully. Call me Adrian. Adrian, she repeated, tasting the sound. It felt real, even if it wasn't his first name or his only one. It felt like something he had chosen, not something given to him by fear. A cool breeze brushed past them, carrying the faint scent of wet leaves and distant rain. She hugged her bare arms, suddenly aware of how thin her dress was. Before she could comment, Adrian's coat shifted. He took a small step closer, not touching her but angling his body to block the wind. You're cold, he said simply. A little, she admitted, but I've been colder. His eyes searched hers. In rooms full of people, he asked. The question struck too close. She looked away. At the office, at the hotel, at my own apartment sometimes, you can be surrounded by noise and still feel like you're screaming into a glass box no one can hear through. He studied her face, and in his gaze she felt no pity, only understanding. Loneliness, he said quietly, is the one thing that does not care if you are human or not. There it was, the open admission she'd been circling since she saw his eyes glow. The word not echoed in her chest. You really are different, she whispered. I am, he said. I was born human. I have not been human for a very long time. Her pulse quickened. So it's true you're a vampire? He tilted his head, considering. That is the name your stories use, yes. There was no drama in his voice, no threat, only a tired acceptance. But your stories forget things. They forget that hunger is not always evil. Sometimes it is just unfinished grief. She frowned slightly. What does that mean? He looked away toward the dark end of the street. For a moment his profile was carved in shadow, the moonlight barely touching the sharp line of his cheekbone. It means, he said slowly, that there are many ways to thirst. For blood, yes, but also for days we lost, for faces we can no longer remember clearly, for the sound of our own heartbeat. A silence stretched between them, heavy but not uncomfortable. Elena realized she was not just afraid of him. She was afraid asterisk for asterisk him, and she didn't understand why. But if you're, she struggled for words that wouldn't sound like accusations from a movie. If you're what you say, then why help me? You don't know me. You could have walked past. You should have walked past. Adrian's fingers curled lightly over the edge of the fountain, as if holding it kept him anchored. When I saw you, he said quietly, I saw myself. Once long ago, I stood outside a door, afraid to go back inside, trapped between a world that hurt me and a night that terrified me. No one took my hand then. I remember exactly how that felt. Elena's throat tightened unexpectedly. And you still remember after all this time? I remember everything, he murmured. That is my curse and my responsibility. The word asterisk responsibility caught her attention. It sounded like something a leader would say, like something a king would carry. She studied him, really studied him, trying to see beyond the red in his eyes and the aura of quiet danger. There was a gravity to him, a weight in his posture, like someone who had stood at the front of too many battles, made too many impossible choices. Yet he was looking at her now as if her small fear, her small life, mattered. She swallowed. So what happens now? Adrian fell silent, drawing in a slow breath he didn't need. He seemed to be listening to something she couldn't hear, the rhythm of the city, the distant rumble of tires, the faint heartbeat of a world that moved on without knowing what was walking inside it. Now, he said at last, I make sure you get home safely, and I make sure your boss does not forget the boundaries we drew tonight. The mention of Victor snapped her back to the ground. He could fire me, she said suddenly, panic spiking through her calm. What if he retaliates? What if tomorrow he pretends nothing happened and then slowly destroys my career? I don't have savings, I don't have family to fall back on, Adrian stepped closer, not close enough to invade her space, but close enough that his presence quieted the spiral of her thoughts. His voice dropped, warm and firm. Breathe, Elena. She did, in, out. The air still tasted of wet stone and night, but it felt less like drowning. You are not alone anymore, he said. I do not make threats lightly. Victor Hale will be guided. Sometimes the most terrifying punishment is the chance to change. He doesn't deserve your mercy, she blurted, then flinched at her own harshness. She wasn't used to saying what she really felt. No one ever does, Adrian replied softly. That is what makes it mercy. His words should have sounded distant, wise in a way that belonged to someone else's life. But they sank into her chest like a seed, like a question she hadn't known she needed to ask herself. How many times had she wished the world would be kinder to her, while secretly wanting cruel people to suffer? Before she could respond, the quiet night shifted. From the mouth of a nearby alley, two figures emerged. Not like Adrian, no aura of ancient power, no glowing eyes. Just two men in worn jackets, hoods half up, moving with the casual, haphazard gait of people who lived in the cracks of the city. Their hands were in their pockets, but their eyes were alert, sharp. They had seen a woman in an expensive dress walking through a quiet street with a strange man. They had seen opportunity. Evening, one of them called, his tone pretending friendliness. You two lost. Elena stiffened. Adrian did not turn immediately. His shoulders merely straightened, his entire body going very still like a predator scenting danger, not to himself, but to something he had decided to protect. No, he answered calmly, his voice almost gentle. We are exactly where we need to be. The second man snorted. Nice coat, man, nice dress. His gaze slid down Elena's figure, lingering in a way that made her stomach knot. You guys coming from a party. Adrian's head turned by a fraction, enough for Elena to see his profile harden. The red in his eyes deepened, but his voice remained perfectly civil. We are leaving one, he said. We will not be delayed. The first man stepped a little closer, grin widening. Relax, just making conversation. City's not so safe at night, you know. Dangerous people out here. Elena felt Adrian's hand find hers again, his grip firmer this time, not asking but reassuring. Yes, Adrian said softly, I know. For a moment, the air trembled between them, the alley, and the two approaching men. Elena could feel it, two kinds of darkness meeting. One was cheap, careless, born of boredom and easy cruelty. The other was vast and controlled and terribly, carefully measured. She realized something then. Adrian didn't just avoid violence, he restrained it, constantly, every second. There was a quiet struggle inside him bigger than anything happening on this street. "Elena," he said without looking at her, his tone low and steady, "I am going to ask you a difficult favor." Her throat was dry. "What?" "Trust me," he replied, "even when it is frightening to do so." Her heart pounded. "Are you going to hurt them?" He hesitated just long enough for her to hear the conflict in his silence. "I will do everything I can not to," he said finally, "but I will not allow them to hurt you." The two men laughed, mistaking his calm for weakness. One of them shoved his hands deeper into his pockets, the gesture sharp and impatient. "Man, this doesn't have to be complicated," he said. "Hand over whatever you've got and the lady keeps that pretty face." Adrian's fingers tightened around hers just a little. The night seemed to lean in. "Close your eyes if you need to," he murmured to her. "But remember this, Elena, monsters are not always the ones you were taught to fear." Her pulse roared in her ears. Ahead, the men took another step forward. Beside her, the Vampire King's eyes began to glow, not just red now, but with something fierce and heartbreakingly gentle, like fire lit for warmth, not destruction. And as the first man reached for her arm, time stretched thin, holding its breath between the danger of the moment and the choice Adrian was about to make. A choice that would reveal, for the first time, what he truly was willing to do, and what he refused to become again. The man's fingers were inches from Elena's arm when Adrian moved. It was not fast in the way movies showed, all blurs and impossible cuts. It was something quieter, almost graceful, like watching a curtain fall. One moment Adrian stood beside her, hand wrapped around hers. The next, his body shifted between her and the men, a dark wall that felt strangely safe. "Stop," he said. One word, no roar, no snarl, yet it cut through the night like a bell. The man's hand froze midair, his eyes widening for a reason he didn't understand. Elena could see it, confusion flickering across his face, like he was trying to step forward and something unseen held him. "What the?" he muttered, trying to move his feet. They stayed rooted to the ground. The second man frowned, annoyed. "What's your problem, man?" He took another step, then frowned deeper, glancing down. His sneakers wouldn't move either. "Hey, is this some kind of—" Adrian lifted his hand slightly, not even fully extending his arm. The air around the two men seemed to thicken, like invisible threads had tightened around their ankles and wrists. They struggled, faces shifting from arrogance to fear. Elena watched, her own fear warping into awe. The streetlights overhead buzzed and dimmed, their warm yellow fading to a softer, cooler glow. The shadows around Adrian darkened, but they didn't stretch outward like a threat. They pulled inward, drawn to him as if the darkness trusted him. "Let us go," the first man snapped, his bravado cracking. "What are you doing? This isn't funny." Adrian's eyes glowed faintly as he looked at them. There was no pleasure in his expression, no cruelty, only a deep, controlled sadness. "Look at her," he said softly. The second man blinked. "What?" "Look at her," Adrian repeated. "Really look." The two of them, struggling against an invisible grip, turned their eyes toward Elena. She hugged her arms around herself, confusion and anger written clearly in the tight set of her mouth, the tremble at the corner of her jaw. Under the streetlight, the faint red mark on her wrist, Victor's too-tight, guiding hand from earlier, stood out like a confession she hadn't wanted anyone to see. "You see a woman in a dress," Adrian said quietly. "Weak, alone, an easy night. You do not see the days that brought her here, the hours of biting her tongue, the nights she went home and replayed every careless word from people who treated her as less than human." The first man forced a laugh, but his eyes were uneasy. "You don't know her." Adrian's gaze softened, flicking to Elena's face. "I know enough," he murmured. "I know the way her shoulders tense when a man steps too close. I know the way she planned a lie just to feel safe for one evening. I know she stood outside that hotel door and whispered for help, even though she believes in nothing but her own ability to endure. Elena's breath hitched. She hadn't spoken those words aloud, but he had heard them anyway. How she began. He glanced back at her, and for a moment the glow in his eyes dimmed. A heart that cries loud enough, he said gently, sometimes crosses borders it was never meant to reach. The second man shook his head as if trying to break free of a spell. This is insane, he snapped. I don't know what trick you're pulling, but we're not. You are not evil, Adrian interrupted. Not yet. You are thoughtless, and thoughtlessness is the first step toward becoming something you cannot escape. He stepped closer. The invisible threads holding them trembled but did not break. The men flinched. Please, Elena whispered suddenly, surprising herself. Don't hurt them. The words tumbled out before she could catch them. She was still shaking. They had frightened her. They would have robbed her, maybe worse. And yet the idea of Adrian snapping their necks or drinking their blood like in every vampire story she'd ever seen made something inside her recoil. Adrian went very still. Slowly, he turned his face toward her. In his eyes, she saw something shift, like a heavy door cracking open to let light in. You ask mercy for those who frightened you, he said, voice low. Why? Because, she swallowed hard. Because if you become the monster they expect, then they win. The world wins. It proves nothing good survived in you. And her voice broke. I don't want to owe my safety to cruelty. I'm tired of everything costing someone else blood. Silence fell like snow. For a long time, Adrian didn't answer. His chest rose and fell in a slow, unnecessary breath. When he finally spoke, his tone had changed, gentler, almost reverent. Do you know, he murmured, how long it has been since anyone tried to protect me from what I might become? Elena shook her head, her throat tight. He looked back at the two men, still pinned by an invisible weight. Their earlier swagger was gone, replaced by raw, shaken fear. You will walk away from this unharmed, Adrian said, but you will not walk away unchanged. He lifted his hand and his eyes flared. The men gasped. For them, it lasted only a few seconds. But Elena could see something pass across their faces, shock, horror, grief, as if they were suddenly feeling pain that wasn't theirs. Tears sprang to the first man's eyes without warning, rolling down his cheeks. The second man's jaw trembled, his bravado shattering. What are you doing to us? He choked. Nothing permanent, Adrian replied. I am only letting you borrow one memory from each woman you have ever frightened, just a heartbeat of what it felt like to stand where she stood, to walk home watching every shadow, to wonder if tonight is the night everything breaks. The men shuddered, breath coming in ragged gasps. The streetlight above them flickered hard, buzzing angrily before returning to steady light. Then Adrian's hand dropped. The invisible binding snapped. The two men staggered back, legs nearly giving out. One of them fell to his knees, chest heaving. Leave, Adrian said quietly. Take nothing that is not yours, not tonight, not ever again if you can help it. The first man stared at Elena with eyes full of something new, shame. I'm sorry, he stammered, voice breaking around the words like he wasn't used to saying them. I can't. Go, Adrian repeated, softer this time. They went. Not running, stumbling, almost blindly, as if they could not bear what they had just felt. They vanished into the dark mouth of the alley they had come from, two small figures swallowed by a city that rarely cared who walked its veins. But Elena knew, with a strange, ringing certainty, that they would not forget tonight. The street fell quiet again. The tension that had stretched the air began to ease, like a string slowly uncoiling. Adrian's shoulders lowered. He looked suddenly older, as if even restrained mercy took strength from him. You didn't hurt them, Elena said softly. He turned toward her, studying her face. I did, he answered honestly. Just not in a way you can see. The ghosts of fear I placed in their memories will haunt them for a time. I hope they choose to let that haunting change them, not crush them. She searched his expression. Does it cost you something, using your power like that? His eyes flicked away just for a moment. Everything worth doing costs something. She stepped closer. What did it cost? There it was again, that small crack in his composure. I taste their fear, he admitted. Their pain, the echoes of the harm they would have done if I had not stopped them. I carry those echoes with me. His hand brushed his chest lightly over the crimson stone at his throat. I add them to all the others. Elena looked at the pendant. It pulsed faintly, a slow red glow as if responding to his touch. It did not feel like a trophy, it felt like a burden. Is that why your eyes are so sad? She asked quietly. Because of everything you remember. He didn't answer right away. The wind tugged at the edge of his coat, bringing with it the distant sound of a siren and the low hum of a passing train. Finally, he said, partly, and partly because in all these years I found very few who believed I could be anything other than what I am. Elena met his gaze steadily. I don't know what you are yet, she said, but I know what you did. You saved me. You listened when I didn't even believe anyone was listening. You chose mercy when it would have been easier to choose fear. His jaw tightened, as if her words hurt in a way he didn't know how to guard against. Do not make me better than I am, Elena. I have done terrible things. I have been the nightmare parents warn children about. Maybe, she said, but standing here tonight you were. He looked at her for a long, searching moment. Then, very slowly, he inclined his head, as if accepting a judgment from a higher court than any he had known. You should go home, he said softly. It's late. Your body may pretend it is made of iron, but it is not. It deserves rest. She hesitated. Will you walk me? A faint, almost surprised light touched his eyes. If you wish. They walked side by side through the quiet streets. The city began to thin, the buildings softening from glass and steel into brick and plaster. Elena's apartment building was nothing impressive, a cracked facade, flickering stairwell light, a metal door that stuck when it rained. But tonight it felt different as they approached, less like a hiding place, more like something she could lay claim to. On the way, they spoke in pieces. She told him about her small childhood, a mother who worked 3 jobs, a father who left when she was 10, the way she learned to make herself useful so people would keep her around. She told him how Victor had started as a mentor, how his guidance had slowly turned into something thinner, colder, lined with expectations she never agreed to. Adrian listened, not once interrupting. When he did ask questions, they were simple human ones. Did you have time to draw then? Who was the first person who told you that you were good at something? When did you stop believing them? His curiosity was not hungry. It was careful, like someone touching delicate glass. In return, he offered pieces of himself, small fragments that slipped out almost accidentally. I remember when this city was still lit by torches. Once I ruled a court where kindness was a kind of rebellion. I had a brother once. He was braver than I was. He is dust now. Were you really a king? She asked softly as they reached her street. He looked up at the thin strip of night between the buildings. Yes, he said. In a world that no longer exists, I sat on a throne built on the fear of men and the loyalty of monsters. His voice turned distant. At first I believed I could rule with mercy. I thought power in gentle hands would heal what power in cruel hands had broken. But mercy is slow and fear is loud. My people wanted safety more than they wanted goodness, so they chose blood. He fell silent, jaw clenched. What happened? She asked, almost afraid to know. I refused to become what they wanted, he said at last. So they left, or died, or killed. In the end, I watched my kingdom crumble, stone by stone, because I would not rule through terror. I have wandered ever since, a king of nothing, trying to use what I am without becoming the thing I once swore to destroy. They stopped in front of her building. The streetlight above hummed softly, casting a pale circle of light over cracked pavement and the dented metal door. That sounds lonely, Elena said. It is, Adrian replied. Then he added with a small, weary honesty, until tonight. Silence settled between them, gentle this time. Elena looked at him, really looked. At the careful distance he kept despite his power, at the way he always angled himself to the side of danger, not the center, at the eyes that glowed with something more than hunger, compassion, regret, hope, though he clearly didn't trust it. You know, she said slowly, a small, unsteady smile tugging at her lips, you're not a very good fake boyfriend. His brows lifted, a hint of amusement returning. No. You didn't put your arm around me once. You didn't kiss me at the door in front of my creepy boss. You didn't even call me darling. She lifted her hands dramatically. Zero commitment to the role. For a moment, he just stared at her. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed. It was a low, quiet sound, rusty with disuse, but real. It warmed the air between them more than the streetlight did. I apologize, he said, inclining his head in a mock bow. It has been some time since I practiced mortal romance theater. She bit back a smile, but her gaze softened. Thank you, though, for playing along, for everything. He regarded her for a long moment, the glow in his eyes tamped down to a soft, ember-like light. You owe me nothing, he said, but there is one thing I will ask of you. Her heart skipped. What is it? Do not make yourself small again, he said quietly. Not for a man like Victor. Not for anyone who sees you as a convenience instead of a person. The lie you told tonight, it protected you, yes. But it also told you a dangerous story, that you are only safe if someone more frightening stands beside you. She swallowed, his words hitting a place too deep for sarcasm. Then what am I supposed to stand beside? Yourself, he answered. Your work, your dreams, the parts of you that refused to be broken even when you were sure you would be. He paused. And if you ever truly need help, not the pretend kind, not the lie spoken to scare a predator, but real help. He reached into his coat and took out something small and dark, pressed it gently into her hand. She looked down. It was a ring, simple black metal, cool to the touch. A tiny red stone sat in the center, so dark it was almost invisible until the light caught it. Wear it, he said, or keep it hidden if you prefer. But if the day comes when you are cornered and there is no lie left to save you, place a drop of your blood on the stone and say my name. Not loudly, not as a scream, as a call. She stared at the ring, then back at him. Isn't that dangerous for you? Yes, he said honestly. Every bond is, but I am tired of walking this world with no one allowed to call my name. The truth of that, the quiet ache in it, made her chest tighten. I don't want to use it lightly, she whispered. I know, he replied. That is why I trust you with it. She slid the ring onto the chain of her small necklace rather than her finger, tucking it beneath the neckline of her dress, close to her heart. It felt heavier than it should, but not in a bad way, like a promise. How will I know, she asked slowly, that you're okay, that you're out there not suffering alone somewhere? He blinked as if the question startled him, then his gaze softened. You will not, he said. Not in the way you are used to, but if the night feels less heavy sometimes, if you find courage rising in you when you thought you had none left, perhaps that will be my way of answering. It wasn't the concrete reassurance she wanted, but it felt honest, and honesty, she was starting to learn, was rarer than miracles. Will I ever see you again? She asked. He hesitated, the weight of centuries in that pause. If I said no, he answered, it would be kinder. You could fold tonight into a story and leave it behind, but it would be a lie. She held his gaze. Then tell me the truth. The truth is, Adrian said quietly, I do not know. I am drawn to places where fear has grown too loud, to people who stand at doors, unable to go in or out. If our paths cross again, it will be because your life and my curse touch at some fragile edge. Her eyes burned unexpectedly. That sounds sad. He gave a faint, almost playful sigh. Most true things are in some way. A soft, strange silence settled between them. She didn't want to go inside. He didn't seem ready to disappear into the night yet. They stood there, two unlikely souls on a cracked city sidewalk, the distance between them small and enormous at the same time. You said earlier, Elena whispered, that when you took my hand, your heart tried to remember how to beat. Did you mean that? His eyes darkened, red deepening like wine in a glass. Yes, he said, it frightened me. Why? Because hope, he replied, is more dangerous to me than any hunter. She took a slow breath. Her chest hurt, but in a good way, like a muscle finally waking up. Then let me be dangerous for once, she said softly, to something that isn't me. He stared at her, stunned into stillness. For a long moment, the night was just the sound of their breathing, the faint buzz of the light, the distant rhythm of a city that had no idea a queenless king stood on one of its forgotten streets. Adrian stepped closer. Not much. Just enough that she could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the scar near his jaw, the tiny crease in his forehead that appeared when he was trying not to feel too much. "I cannot give you a normal life," he murmured. "I cannot be the boyfriend you invented to scare away cruel men. I am older than your country, Elena. I carry a kingdom in my shadow and a hunger I will never fully conquer. Every day I choose not to be a monster. Some days I fail." She did not flinch. "I didn't ask you to be normal," she said. "I asked you to be kind. Tonight you were." His throat worked, as if swallowing words he didn't dare release. "You make it sound easy." "It isn't," she replied. "That's why it matters." He looked at her as if he were memorizing her. The curve of her cheek, the way her eyes shone despite exhaustion, the stubborn set of her mouth. Finally, with a care that made her heart twist, he reached up and brushed a loose strand of hair from her face, his fingers barely grazing her skin. Every nerve in her body lit up. It wasn't passion, not yet. It was something deeper, quieter, recognition. "If we meet again," he said softly, "I will ask you then if you still believe I can be what you see in me tonight." "And if I say yes," she whispered. His gaze dropped briefly to her lips, then returned to her eyes, as if he was denying himself something for reasons she couldn't yet know. "Then," he answered, a faint smile ghosting across his mouth, "I may have to start believing it too." He stepped back, the gesture tender and painful at once. The shadows near the corner of the building stirred, reaching for him like old friends. "Good night, Elena," he said. "Good night, Adrian." He hesitated, then added, "Do not let them take your light." She straightened a little. "I won't," she said, and for the first time she almost believed herself. He walked backward a few steps, his eyes on her, then turned and let the darkness swallow him. Not in a puff of smoke or a dramatic swirl, just a man in a long coat, moving through shadows that seemed a little too eager to hide him. Within seconds, he was gone. Elena stood there for a long moment, her fingers pressed lightly over the ring hidden beneath her dress. The street was just a street again. The night was just night. But she was not the same woman who had stood outside the Seraphine Hotel, clutching a lie. The next morning, she walked into her office with slower, more deliberate steps. People greeted her. She answered, but she no longer tried to shrink into the walls. When Victor appeared in her doorway, briefcase in hand, ready to resume his old game, he stopped abruptly. Because Elena did not smile. She did not laugh nervously or look away. She met his eyes calmly, her posture straight, her hands steady on her keyboard. There was something different in her gaze, quiet, solid, like someone who had walked beside a storm and learned it could choose where to break. "About last night," Victor began, forcing a smooth tone. "Yes," Elena said. "About last night, I'm documenting everything that happened, and I'm sending it to HR, after that, if necessary, to a lawyer." Her voice did not shake. "You will speak to me only about work from now on. You will not comment on my appearance. You will not suggest private meetings at hotels. If you do, I will not hesitate again." Victor stared, jaw tight. "You don't want to start a war with me, Elena. You'll lose." She tilted her head slightly. "I'm already tired of living like I've lost," she replied. "So if you want a war, you can fight my paper trail, my union rep, and whatever conscience you still have left. Or," she added, her tone softening into something almost kind, "you could choose a different way to be a powerful man." For a moment, something like guilt flickered across his features, just a flash. Then he scoffed and stepped back. "We'll see," he muttered and left. Elena exhaled slowly. Her heart hammered, but she didn't feel fragile. She felt clear. Tired, yes, shaken, absolutely, but clear. As the days turned into weeks, small changes followed. The two men from that alley were seen around the neighborhood again, but different. One got a job sweeping floors at a corner store. The other began walking an elderly neighbor's dog for free. They nodded at strangers now, their eyes softer, their steps less predatory. Occasionally, Elena caught their gazes when she passed. They looked away quickly, not from shame alone, but from a strange, awkward respect. At work, Victor grew cautious. HR meetings and the quiet pressure of being watched made him choose his words more carefully. He never apologized directly, but he learned, slowly and painfully, that power could be used without touching. Elena started sketching again in the evenings. At first, just simple shapes, hands, faces, the outline of a coat caught in the wind. Then deeper things, eyes glowing softly in the dark, a ring with a tiny red stone, a city street half in shadow, half in light. Sometimes, late at night, she would stand at her window and look out over the rooftops, fingers resting on the pendant beneath her shirt. She didn't call his name. Not yet. Not just because she didn't want to endanger him, but because she knew calling him would mean admitting something to herself. That she missed someone she barely knew. Someone who had seen her clearly once and given her permission to see herself. Seasons shifted. The air grew colder. The leaves turned, fell, and turned again. Life did not turn into a fairy tale. There were still bills, deadlines, lonely evenings. But under it all, a different story hummed, one where she was not just surviving, one where she had chosen once to believe in a kindness older than her fear. On the first snowfall of winter, as flakes drifted past her window in soft, slow spirals, Elena felt a sudden, quiet warmth near her heart. She looked down. The ring on her necklace pulsed faintly against her skin, a single soft thrum like a distant heartbeat answering her unspoken thoughts. Far away, in a forgotten part of the city where ruins slept under new foundations, a man with crimson eyes stood under the falling snow. He felt the answering echo in his own chest, a reminder of a hand held on a cold night and a woman who had asked for mercy instead of vengeance. Adrian closed his eyes and let the snow settle on his hair, his lashes, the worn shoulders of his coat. "She still believes," he whispered to the empty air. There was a tremor in his voice that sounded very much like hope. "Then so will I." In that quiet between one heartbeat and the next, the curse of the vampire king shifted, just a little. Not broken, not undone, but altered by a simple human truth. Sometimes, the bravest thing a person can do is choose kindness when fear would be easier. And sometimes, destiny does not send a warrior or an angel to save you. Sometimes it sends a tired, lonely king of the night, who has spent centuries refusing to become a monster, just waiting for one human girl to see the truth and say the words his heart had forgotten it needed. "You are not what they say you are, you can be more." Their paths would cross again, on another night, another border between fear and choice. But that is another story. For now, there was this. A woman in a city learning to stand taller, and a vampire king under the falling snow, letting the fragile, terrifying possibility of goodness settle softly over his shoulders like a crown he might, one day, dare to wear again.